This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers, Christoph Trapp here, episode 649 on deck today. Really appreciate everyone tuning in. And we're going to talk about how do we connect the dots in marketing through insights. And what's an insight to begin with? I would like to remind everyone we are back on Amazon. So everything around me, not that Iowa Hawkeyes football helmet, but the sound panels, the fake plant, everything is for sale on Amazon. So if you are watching on Amazon, just check out the carousel below. If you are not watching on Amazon, just search for Christoph Trapp on Amazon and you should be able to find me on there. So today's guest, Chris Kocek, he wrote the book, Any Insights Yet? Connect the Dots, Create New Categories, is joining me today to talk about that exact same topic. You can scan that QR code over there if you like to, if you're not watching on Amazon, and if you want to give it a read. But let's find out, how do we even do that? What's an insight? How do we make it work to determine patterns? And who actually does use insight, or are people just making it up as they go? So let's find out. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you. Really glad we were able to connect and talk about your book and the topic at hand here. So let's first of all start here. I mean, with my little bit of a snarky comment on, are people even looking at stuff, or they're just making things up as they go? I mean, what is the prevalence of one or the other?
Well, I think that, insights is a popular topic, and a lot of people say they have insights when really they should just say, hey, I've got a good data point here, or I've got a really interesting observation. What do you guys think of that? The problem with that is that it doesn't sound as exciting as an insight. An insight is something that's deeper, that's new, and different than what anybody else has noticed before. And so sometimes if the data point is new to you, you might say, hey, that's an insight. But I have a different definition on what an insight is, which is that it's like a constellation of all of those things. It is a data point plus an observation, plus a trend, plus perhaps a cultural tension, things like that, all coming together to solve a particular business problem or a marketing campaign challenge.
So, I mean, it's not just an interesting tidbit, right? I mean, it's like, I can talk about all kinds of interesting things all the time. This is kind of interesting. They said that this consumer has this opinion, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it has something to do with what I'm actually doing, right? So if I'm learning something about how people come to my business or my services through my podcast or my blog or whatever, it can just be, oh, interesting. We had 12,000 people from Hungary on the blog, but we don't really work with anybody in Hungary. So who cares? No offense to that country, right? But somehow you have to tie it back to what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. So an insight is only useful if it's useful. So there are interesting insights, but we're after the ones that are both interesting and useful, that can tie back to the brand. And there are actually three kinds of insights, at least as I've identified them. One is a category insight. So that's where you build a new category based on your aha moment. So this is businesses like Netflix, Airbnb, Slack, Mamava, which is a business out of Vermont. And so each of those is a category, brand new category, didn't exist before, disrupted the entire category that they kind of bumped into. Does that make sense for starters?
Yeah, it does. Yep.
Perfect. And then there's brand insights, where you reframe an existing category. So you're not creating a new category, you're just reframing the existing category that you're in. So liquid death is canned water. It's more than just about the can, but it's kind of reframing the world of water to what they have to offer. Or Dove reframes the idea of beauty, of the beauty category, with their campaign. Vital Farms is a great example of reframing the egg category. around, what really is, spacious conditions for hens. And so focusing on pasture raised eggs. So they reframed the consumer mindset around the category, or reframed their value proposition. So that's the second kind of insight. And then the third kind of insight is campaign insights. That's that aha moment that leads to a huge campaign platform that can last for a really long time. For example, the Lay's Do Us a Flavor campaign, or the Snickers campaign around You're Not You When You're Hungry. So those are some examples of campaign insights, or insights that lead to great campaigns.
The one thing I maybe want to shift to just a little bit, in your book, you talk about interrogating language. And when you were just talking about um, the canned water category. So it's interesting to me. I have no idea about why anybody would drink canned water at all. I have no idea, but I'm like, you know what? I wonder if there's canned water, if I can buy that here, because so the way I recycle, believe it or not, I have this big box and the cans, the 12 ounce, I think it's 12-ounce cans, they go in there. And everything other than the cans that go in there is a total pain in my neck to recycle. I have to go over there, I have to put it in the thing, right? Except the 12-ounce cans. And I think there's a different thing, a different bag for 16-ounce cans. I don't have those. But so my point is, I would like canned water instead of the bottles, because then I can just throw it in that same recycling thing, right? To take it back. So it's kind of interesting, how you think about it. But let's talk about interrogating language. And I think some people struggle with that because people use wishy-washy language, or they use the wrong term, or they don't, it's not exactly within context. So let's talk about, how do you do that? Is it just by you're trying to figure out the context, or you're trying to understand what they actually mean, even though they use technically the wrong word, because nobody is a walking dictionary? Or how does that work in the actual process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So listening, it starts with active listening, typically with your customers, which again, you can look closely, or do some data mining on Amazon reviews, or call center transcripts, or you can figure some things out from focus groups. I was doing a focus group with some people for a quick service restaurant, and we were talking about eating healthy. And despite, the prompt being around, so when do you eat healthy? And tell us more about that. This one person in the focus group kept talking about eating well, as if it were synonymous to eating healthy. And I paused and I said, hey, what does that word mean to you? We've been talking about eating healthy. You keep using this word well. What's the difference to you between eating healthy and eating well? And then they opened up and they talked about how eating well has a certain amount of flavor to it. Like when you eat well, there's maybe a little bit of decadence to the flavor profile of the food, as opposed to eating healthy, which is like naked chicken and broccoli. Doesn't really appeal to the flavor. It's kind of like eating cardboard. You sort of force yourself to do it. But when you're eating well, you can both eat healthy, but also feel good about what you're eating. And so just one word. Another example would be, in terms of language, how with one elastic bandage company out there, you might say that their approach to wound care is, how do we hide life's little mistakes, right? And then there's another brand out there that says, how do we celebrate life's little adventures? So that's a great example of a brand. That's the Welly brand, where they talk about bravery badges, right? And they're colorful and they're fun, and kids and parents love them. And just reframing it with that one word, bravery badges, and then celebrate life's little adventures, can really put you on a different path by interrogating the language, and thinking of a new way to frame the language as well.
Yeah, very interesting that how people use language, and how it's interpreted. Um, Anyways, but how do you? I know you talk about a lot of category creation, and I always find that very interesting, because there might have been a trend, even, or a wave, where everybody was trying to do that, right? Everybody's trying to create a new category, and at some point, it's pretty difficult, right? I mean, to do that, if it's depending on what it is, I guess. If it's something there's a huge need, then maybe not so much, but certainly it seems like it to me. But at what point do you take these insights and you decide it is the right thing to do to create a new category, or it's just something to evolve the category you're already in?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a tough question because you don't always know. It's not perfect. The information doesn't live in a perfect way. But let's just look at Netflix, for example, right? So, what were the different dots in the constellation, which is this metaphor that I use about insights? That insights are like a constellation, and it combines all of these different data dots or these different dots that are available to everybody. So, with Netflix, you know, the first thing was that VHS changed to DVD. If DVD hadn't come around, I don't think Netflix would have ever come into being, because those lightweight, flat DVDs needed to exist for the founders of Netflix to then kind of say, okay, how are we going to push this through the United States Postal Service? Another thing that needed to happen was the existence of Amazon. So Amazon launched in 1994, Netflix launched in 1997. And this was by no accident, because people started to become more comfortable reviewing things or seeing book summaries and things like that on Amazon initially. That was kind of their main product, besides the books themselves, was, hey, here's the book summary. Now you can make your decision, buy that. It's easy. You don't need to go in a bookstore for that. So then Netflix comes along and says, okay, people are getting more comfortable browsing online for these things. What do we need? We need movie summaries. We need these lightweight DVDs, and we need to be able to ship them. And they spend hundreds of hours studying the United States Postal Service for how to work within their system to get these DVDs shipped. And then there were the three big pain points at the time. For anybody who remembers back in the day, Blockbuster was kind of the king of video rental, and annoying late fees. I saw somewhere, I think it was in 2000, Blockbuster had $800 million worth of revenue from late fees, which was 16% of their revenue. So that's a good thing for Blockbuster, frustrating for consumers. That's a pain point for consumers. And then another pain point was even just going to the video store in the first place. And some people might say, oh, I didn't mind. I liked going there. But we can all remember going maybe with a friend, leaving empty-handed, or having to go there to return the video to avoid those frustrating late fees. So there are these different pain points that existed within that video rental ecosystem. And all of those things were there for people to see. Those were like the stars in the sky. But then the founders of Netflix came along and they connected the dots between all those things. And they said, I think we have a new idea here, which is we're going to switch from video rentals to a subscription model. We're going to push things through the United States Postal Service as a totally different distribution method than had ever been done before. And then third, we're going to really ramp up our data-driven recommendations, similar to what was starting to happen on Amazon, which is, if you liked this, you're probably going to like this. So data-driven engine recommendations.
What's interesting about Netflix too is I was thinking certainly I remember those days when all that happened. But today I watch Netflix, quite frankly, because it's just the danger of me wasting too much time on something that I don't even enjoy is so much smaller than if I were to go to the movies, right? I go to the movies, you go to one movie, and it's like if you don't like it, you're kind of stuck there, or you can leave. On Netflix, if I don't like something after 5 minutes, I'll just watch something else on Netflix, or I'll go to Amazon Prime, or I'll go to whatever, Peacock. There's a gazillion options nowadays. So certainly it seems like the category that they created, they've also evolved over time.
Mm-hmm.
How do companies, and of course, Gen Xennial here, I guess that's the generation I'm in. There's always a little bit of fear, right? The time we grew up, oh, we don't want to hurt what we're currently doing, whatever. How do you evolve the category, and how do you know it's the right time? If you would have, and I don't know if this happened on Netflix, but if I were to run Netflix in the old days, and you would say to me, hey, we're going to totally transition to streaming, I can see that some people who are really married to the idea of sending stuff in the mail, which they just stopped doing not too long ago, interestingly, like they might be like, well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to hurt the current category we're in.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had that brief period of time where it was Netflix Quickster. Do you remember that? they were going to spin off the two different branches of the business. There was going to be a streaming component and there was going to be the DVD component. And everybody threw their hands up and were like, no, I don't want to pay two different prices for two different things. I want, sort of all included stuff. And so how they evolved, first of all, they said, okay, this isn't working. They lost a lot of share value in a fairly short period of time as a result of that decision. They decided to stop that fairly quickly. And then, they're constantly analyzing their own data to evolve their offerings, bring different people onto the platform. One of my favorite examples, actually, I've got two with Netflix. One is Adam Sandler. So he signed a $250 million deal with Netflix. And people were like, what is Netflix doing? This is crazy. Like, Adam Sandler continues to bomb at the box office. But the thing is, they were looking at the periphery, which is one of the techniques I talk about in the book. So the data that everyone else was looking at with regard to Adam Sandler was US box office earnings, critical reviews of his films, Rotten Tomatoes scores. And if that was all you were looking at, you would think this was a really bad move. But the data that Netflix was looking at was his global box office performance, high repeat viewing stats in countries around the world, and the volume of submitted ratings for his movies. So every time Netflix would put a new Adam Sandler movie up in Brazil or some other country, straight to the top. It always goes straight to the top. And they're a global company. So they're thinking about things a little bit differently. They're looking at data sets that are different. And that's one of the ways that they've evolved in terms of some of their offerings. Another example that I love from Netflix is that I just learned about, actually, is the way they use their data to see where people skipping. You mentioned, hey, if I don't like a movie, I can stop it at the 5-minute mark or the 10-minute mark. Well, one of the things that Netflix started to realize by analyzing their own data was how much people were fast forwarding through credits. Makes perfect sense. But they introduced the skip intro button, and then everybody else has followed suit since then. But that's like a little bit of a product evolution that didn't exist before. But they looked at their data, they said, X% of people keep doing this. What can we do to improve the user experience, even if it's just a micro improvement? And they made the skip intro button.
Well, I give you credit for saying that everyone followed suit, but not everybody did, because I was watching episodes. I don't know what the seasons were. I think Young Sheldon is currently season 7, and that's going to wrap up their run. So I must have watched season 1 through 5 roughly on one network, Netflix, where you could skip the intro, which is only like 22 seconds or something, but you can skip all that. And then there was something else. Oh, you know what it was? You could skip to the next episode like super quickly at the end. And then they didn't have season 6. So season 6, I had to go over to somewhere else, maybe YouTube TV. It could be wrong, but wherever I went, they didn't have those two things. And I'm literally sitting here because I watched those seasons like back to back to back to back. And I'm sitting here, I said to myself, I'm like, oh, this is horrible. I can't skip the 22 seconds of intro. I can't skip to the next episode. Like I wasted a whole minute per episode. It's like 22 minutes over the next how many days here. So it's kind of interesting how those little things actually make a difference. Maybe the next 3 minutes here, let's turn a little bit and talk about how do you sell what we know about customers internally. How do you sell it to people? How do we get them to buy it? And then how do we make sure we actually analyze it correctly? I mean, I know plenty of examples where, somebody says something and it's misinterpreted, and now that's the gospel, even though it wasn't quite the right phrasing or playback.
Yeah, I mean, selling an insight is incredibly important. That's maybe more than half the work itself is being able to articulate the insight. And that's the last part of the book. How do you sell an insight? Well, you got to take your cues from some of the great storytellers out there. And that brings us back to movies again. So, how do storytellers, whether that's Pixar, or if you're into murder mysteries or things like that, how do they hook your attention? What do great movies and television shows or podcasts do to hook your attention in the very beginning? Sometimes they'll use, if it's a movie, it might be a dramatic scene, something that just, catches you off guard. If it's in a presentation, it might be a mind-blowing stat, something that people just had never heard of before, or that stat is reframed in a different way. So that can be a way to hook people's attention. But then you got to keep people along for the ride. And if you just reveal your insight right away and say, hey, here's my insight statement, I'm not going to give you any backstory or any information, it's just going to fall flat. People aren't going to be able to really absorb, how did you get there? So it's a little bit like you got to take them through the jungle. And so you've got to go through the jungle very quickly of, this finding and this finding and this finding. And then people are nodding. They're in the state of like, oh yeah, I've seen that too. I've seen that too. And I've experienced that personally. And then when you get to the actual reveal of the insight, they're almost able to finish your sentence for you. And there's not a lot of combat over that. Now, again, the articulation's super important. Words are super important. But I liken it to movies with great plot twists. So if you go back and watch The Sixth Sense or Memento or Knives Out, any of those types of movies, or Gone Girl, where there are some really big plot twists, usually toward the very end, you'll say, oh my gosh, all the clues were there the whole time. And so when you're trying to sell an insight, take your cues from great storytellers and kind of sprinkle these little clues around in your presentation or in the one pager or the lead up to the insight or the insight statement, so that people feel like, I've been along for the ride. It was a short ride, and now we've gotten to the insight.
I think it's an interesting concept, especially, I think it's actually very hard to pull off, especially, even staying with the Netflix example. There's people joking in Netflix groups on Facebook, right? What are the best movies to watch while you're on your phone? So like those clues, you might actually miss them, right? Same in a meeting, you send something to somebody, they got 12 other things going on, right? They got notifications over here, whatever, email coming in over here. And certainly it's harder than ever to get people to pay attention, even if you can't officially, formally demand it. But we know how that goes. Chris, time always flies when you have fun. I really appreciate you coming on the show. The last minute here, tell us who should connect with you, who should reach out to you, that kind of thing. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, any insights yet is really focused on anybody in business, because everybody wants insights because they need to, have a competitive advantage, and they needed the insights yesterday. So these techniques that I've laid out in the book, some of which we've talked about today, these techniques are usable by, anybody in the marketing department, in business, in the creative departments as well, because it's everybody's job to come up with insights. So strategists, creatives, marketers, it's very popular in MBA programs and advertising programs. So those are the kind of the main people who have been reading it, writing reviews, saying good things, and reaching back out to me. And then as far as following up with me, if you have any questions, you can certainly find me on LinkedIn at Chris Kocek. And I also have a newsletter called the Light Bulb Newsletter, which comes out every Thursday, which focuses on, an aha moment, or three different things that will give you an aha moment. Very short read, 2 to 3 minutes each week. That's a great way to connect as well.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. See you then.